All right, welcome to the track guys here. Oh, my screen is not showing it. There we go. So practice sessions, the track guys are all going to be under the Thursday session. So click on there and do test drive. Weather for the race, it is April 10th. The session starts at 4 a.m., but there's times 2 and it's 3 times 6. So it's going to be kind of afternoonish. So the temperature is just going to keep getting hotter and hotter and hotter. As you can tell here, uh, qualifying roughly about 26 degrees Celsius, but then it's just going to keep climbing. The race starts here 11 a.m. And it's going to keep going till about here 5 p.m. So you can see here temperature is just going to get hotter during the race, and we're not going to really have any relief. Southern California, I guess it's hot at this time of year. Precipitation stuff, there's none. It's going to be pretty, well, it is 100% dry. There's a bit of cloud cover, but really not much. So yeah, expect a hot race. And then again, once you come into your session here, view session, you click on this little arrow, test drive, and then you get to choose whatever car you want to run. So we're going to dive into this lap times here. This is track guide for the GR86 here. We've got, I did a few laps trying to prep myself. Then I reset and did my fastest lap was a 131.833. So I'm going to show you guys this lap, then we'll break it down. And then I'm going to go to lap 7 where I did some lift and coast, and it was about just under a second slower. So yeah, we'll look at these two laps. So if you wait till the final thing, so we're going to break down lap 6 is my fastest one. We'll play it full speed, and then we'll play it slow down with me talking about it, and then we'll do the same thing with number 7. So this is going to be lap number 6. So I'm going to play it, and then we'll slow down afterwards. There you go. That was a 131.833. So let's slow it down here and talk about it. So as you're coming for your lap, you want to try to stay as tight as possible against the wall. It makes the track a little bit shorter. Coming to turn 1, you got the 500, the 400. I'm braking more around the 400, and what I want to do is I want to put my right-hand tires just over this red line. You can't go too far over, otherwise you're going to get a slowdown. But if you put kind of your two right tires over it and kind of your left tires, you don't go really much further than half. So we'll break it down here. Here's a 500 board. Here's your 400 board, and you can see I'm already starting to prep the brakes here. So there's a 400, and I'm getting on the brakes off the throttle. And you're going to see here, I don't really want to go too much further than this midpoint, because I find that any further than this, you get a slowdown. So I'm kind of keeping this red line at the midpoint. I'm starting to turn in before the 100 board. Down to second gear. I don't want to get onto the lifted part of the curb here. I want to try to like get my apex kind of right at this flat part of this curb before it starts going up. all the way out to the wall, and I'm going to hug against this wall, and then I'm going to cut back left. I'm trying to stay to the right as much as possible here so that I can cut left after kind of this point here so I can open up the corner a little bit more. You can see here on the brakes before I get to this point, down into first gear. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hug this, the curb in here. I actually do like lifting up a little bit on this one. I find as it helps rotate the rear of the car, especially when you get aggressive on the throttle. It'll help rotate the car a little bit, and then you want to get as close to this point without actually hitting the point, just to carry as much speed as you can out of this corner here. Once you get out of the corner, stay to your left. You're going to kind of use this white line. I find it's a nice reference. Kind of just after this white line, I'm going to lift off the throttle and brake. Not a super aggressive brake, but just enough to slow down enough so I can carry a lot of momentum. So here's that white line. Just after it, you can see I'm getting on the brakes. I turn in a little bit too early for this one. You don't really want to hit this bump. I would prefer just staying on this lower part of the curb. But here I jumped it a little bit, which is not ideal. You can see it unsettles the car a little bit. So that's not the ideal line, but it still works. All the way out to the wall. And you can see there's a different painted wall here, one that's much whiter than the other ones. I kind of use this as a good marker. I'm staying in second gear and I'm running out the revs. Once I get to that wall, you'll see here just a slight lift. Here's the wall, lift, and light brake in. And I want to try to cut this corner as much as I can without getting a slowdown. So if you cut it any more than this, typically you'll get a slowdown. But if you keep your left tires kind of on the edge of this curb, usually you're pretty good. And if you get a nice early turn in, what happens is it sets you up for the exit of the corner much better, because this corner kind of goes up, and then once you hit the apex, it falls back down. So if you don't turn in fast enough, you'll end up just kind of understeering once you get to the other side of this lifted pavement here, and it'll just understeer into the wall. So an early turn in is way better here at this corner, as long as you don't get that slowdown and cut too much. All the way to the wall, just to open up the corner as much as possible, and then you're going to cut across. Start looking at your braking boards. There's 300, there's a 200. I'm braking closer to this 200. There's a 200, and you can see hard on the brakes, opening up the corner as much as possible, and then I got to start turning in. This corner here, you want to get as close to this wall as possible, but you also don't want to wash out too far. Typically what I like to do is, because there's pretty good grip on this GR86, is I don't want to push out all the way to the wall. I want to stay a little bit left of the outside so that I can cut back towards the left as fast as possible. So you'll see here, getting on the throttle before the wall, and I mean, we get really close to the wall here. I don't know how close that is, but it's pretty damn close. Fire chase. Yeah, like you want to get as close as possible to this, kind of cutting the red and white curbs here. Nope, not chase view, back to cockpit view. And then you're going to ring it out all the way. You don't need to go all the way to the wall here. Kind of use this red line as a good marker. And then kind of start cutting across. So what happens is if you go too far right, you tend to make the track longer than it needs to be, because this car has enough grip where you don't need to use all that room. So yeah, you're just making the track a little bit shorter. Otherwise, if you go all the way out, you'll lose a tenth or two pretty consistently. So I'd like to kind of just use the grip I've got and then just go out to the red line and then start cutting back across. Now I'm aiming towards this 200 board. So between the 300 and the 200 board, you kind of start aiming at these trees. And then once you get closer, you just before the 200, you kind of get on the brakes, and then you just kind of ease it, turning right and back into the corner here. So 300, there's your 200. You can see I'm starting to get on the brakes before the 200. Not too aggressive while I'm opening up the corner. Down to second gear. Just trail braking, chill braking, and then onto the throttle. Close to the wall as you can. And then all the way out to the wall to carry as much speed as possible. Next corner, we're looking at the 300 board here. Between the 3, 4, and 300 is, and you can see there's an opening in the wall here. What I like to do is I like to leave a little bit of space from the wall as I'm braking so that I can close that gap towards this opening. Because you can use this opening to your advantage if you get into it and use it as where you start turning. If you stick too close to the wall, you're giving up about 2 feet of track here because the wall kind of goes in about 1.5 feet, 2 feet. So you can use this space to carry more momentum into the corner. So that's why I don't like going too close to the wall too early. So you'll see here, there's a 400. I'm getting slowly closer and closer to the wall. And you even see me turn a little bit here. The steering wheel, it kind of turns because I want to get into this groove to open that up as much as possible. Now I'm getting over this red line, still getting close to the wall, but yet I'm turning right. I go down into second gear, and I want to try to ride these curbs pretty aggressively with this car. Don't go too far to the left. Against there's this red line here. You don't want to go too far to the left because then you're really kind of screwing up your next corner here. So I go to the red line and then I start cutting right, trying to open it up the corner. I like aggressive lift off the throttle here. And getting on these curbs, it really loosens up the rear end. So you can kind of drift a little bit into the corner. And then midway through the corner, you're going to have to get back on throttle just to try to carry up some momentum. And I find this corner very tricky. So what I like to do is get onto these curbs. I'll use them and then I'll downshift into first and I'll try to get the front end to bite as much as possible. So there's a couple ways of doing this one. I like to try to make the exit as straight as possible, but you can also kind of make this a little bit more roundish and then go out all the way to the wall. I don't really like doing that, especially not with this car, because I find there's lots of grip, so you kind of don't need to do that. So here we're going to start braking. So kind of halfway through these curves is kind of when I'm going to start braking, and then I'll go down to first gear. So right about here, start braking. Down into first gear, and I'm trying to get this as wide as possible. You can see here I'm really wide to this corner, and I immediately really hard turn, still braking, and you can see I was trail braking to a point, and now I'm getting back on throttle to try to spin the tires and get really tight exit. So some people carry a little bit more momentum and they'll go all the way out to the wall, whereas I didn't find that really helped me with this car specifically. So I liked a much tighter exit. So I'll come in here really wide, turn really hard, get the front end to bite, and then back on the throttle immediately. You can see how fast that rear end comes around once you get that front end to bite. So here I'm turning. Bam, on the throttle. You'll see my steering wheel really start to turn and open up fast. And then off I go down the straightaway. And that is the 131.833. So now I'm going to go into the lift and coast lap. We're going to play it, and then we'll talk about it again. So that's the 132.747. So just like 9/10 slower than my previous lap. We'll slow it down here and we'll talk about it. But I think what you can notice is that there's some big lift and coasts. So remember we were breaking around the 400 mark here. I'm going to lift way before the 500. So there's a 500 I'm lifting, and look at how much time I'm doing nothing at all. And then I'll get onto the brakes. Roughly the same point here. We're still kind of crossing halfway. Down in a second still, but I'm just trail braking, trying to carry the momentum of the car as much as possible. Since I'm not being aggressive, that's what I'm going to try to do. You're going to see a different line in a few corners because I'm trying to carry the momentum of the car through the corner more. So same line through these first few corners. Again, lifting nice and early, just a small lift, late downshift into first. Lots of trail braking, but easy kind of braking. Same thing here. Remember we were lifting just out, or we were starting to brake after this white line here. So lifting, and look how little amount of braking we need for this corner when we're just doing a fairly long lift. And this settles the car quite a bit. So there was just a little top of the brakes there, not too much. Here again, we're going to lift fairly early. Little bit of a brake in, get the front end turned in, back on throttle. So those two corners, you can see a big difference in the braking with the lift and coast, and they're really not that much slower. So those are two corners specifically that you could gain if you're struggling with. Just try lifting a little bit earlier and a tiny bit of brake. This one here, we were braking around the 200 board, so we're going to lift here just before the 300. Look at all that. There was a lot of lift and coast here. So we'll go back here. There's a 400 board off. Look at all this lift and coast, saving fuel. And this is one of the corners where there's a slight difference is I'm going to try to carry much more apex speed, which is going to push me out further than this red line here. When I was pushing hard, I was going on the other side of the wet line, but with a lot of lift and coast, I preferred carrying as much momentum as possible just so that I'm not losing as much time on my lap. Again, here there was a 200. We're going to lift around the 300. Lots of lift and coast. Just a light trail brake. Get into the corner, second gear, and then power out. Here we were doing around the 300 board. Lift and coast around the 500. Lots of coasting. Starting to get onto the brakes. Opening up the corner. Again, I think this one I'm trying to carry a lot more momentum into it since I'm not braking very hard. Actually, no, I don't even go that far for this one. A little bit of lift. Tiny amount of braking. Back on the throttle. Same thing here. I just carrying a little bit more speed. You'll see here I push out a little bit wider on exit. Just a slight difference. It's just I'm trying to carry much more speed with these. We're going to go back because I didn't really explain passing zones. So obviously, straight away, you're going to have GT4s and BMWs trying to get by you. If you haven't done so yet, I highly suggest looking at the BMW M2 track guide and the GT4 track guide. Just look where their braking zones are. Because some of these corners, the GR86 is going to be the fastest car through the section. So you might not want to let a certain car by if they're not by you before turn one. So yeah, just be aware of that because these cars are quite fast, especially this first little sector here, the tight sectors. Really, you're only going to let cars through on a straightaway. There's not really much room to go anywhere near any other corner. So turn one, obviously, great opportunity to let cars by before turn one. I'm hoping that nobody does something stupid trying to pass you before the 500 board or after the 500 board. If they're not alongside you before this, they're going to be in massive trouble if they try to a dive, and they're probably going to wreck both of you guys. So just be aware with oncoming cars, watch your relative a little bit. but once you get closer to this 500, 400 board, their break-in zones are closer to the 500. So really, they shouldn't. If they're not beside you at this 500 board, they should not be passing you at all. So yeah, just be slightly aware of that. If you see somebody coming fast at you, maybe defend the inside. I mean, if you're at this point kind of thing and you don't think they're going to get any overlap with you, maybe just defend the inside a little bit, but do it early so that they know what you're doing, so that they can kind of adjust a little bit. But this is a pretty good. The whole straightaway is a pretty good overtaking opportunity for other classes. Through here, I really hope nobody's. If somebody is trying to overtake you in this zone, in the break-in zone, I really suggest you brake a little bit earlier and get in behind them. You don't really want to be too wide in this because number one, the BMW is sketchy as hell. Most likely it'll wash you out into the wall. And the GT4s are a little bit better than the BMW, but still, it's not a very wide track. I don't suggest going too wide through here. Once you're past this point, I really hope nobody tries to overtake you guys. I mean, if you're side by side coming out of there, then there's that scenario. I would most likely, if I'm side by side with another class at this point, I would tend to back out of it. If I was a GR86, I would just lift off the throttle, let them get in front of me, and then follow them through. I mean, I really hope nobody's side by side through here again. At least multi-class anyway. If you're fighting with another car, it is possible, but it's unlikely that you'll overtake somebody in this section here. Coming out of here, BMW M2s really don't stand a chance to try to make an overtake. So I typically wouldn't worry too much about them. Most likely, if they were behind you through the fountain, you would have pulled away from them a little bit. And in this tiny little straightaway, they might catch up, but they won't have anything to overtake with. GT4s, they might pull alongside potentially. I kind of doubt it. I don't think they'll have enough speed to do that either. If they're behind you through the fountain, I think the GR86 will have a little bit too much speed out of the corner and through the corner that they probably won't have an opportunity to pass. But we've seen in the past some of the GT4s do kind of make aggressive moves, especially if they're fighting. If they're fighting for position late in the race, be aware of that they might try to do something. Keep that in mind. But at the beginning of the race, I don't see why people would be doing too much stuff here. Again, this is a little small straightaway. I think you're going to be carrying enough momentum most of the time that you should be able to stay in front of any cars behind you. But if they do have an opportunity, they might want to take it. Just be aware there might be a too wide situation into the braking zone here. They won't get you before the braking zone, but maybe a small lift and coast before you get to this point if there's somebody kind of aiming towards your inside. Straight away, obviously perfect opportunity for all classes to get by. Again, watch the other videos to see where their braking zones are. Most of them are around the 300 board. So if you get to the 300 board and there's nobody beside you or having any overlap, typically you're safe to enter the corner at wherever you want to go. If they're getting close to you around the 400 board, be aware they might try to go down the inside. I would recommend there's enough space on the outside of this corner, not really at the apex. So I would recommend again lifting a little bit earlier. If they're beside you at the 300 board, that's where they're braking. You can brake near the 200 board, but I would just lift off and let them by and then get in behind. So again, there's room on the exit of this corner, but really not at the apex. I mean, you can try to turn in later, but it's kind of awkward. So hopefully there's no side-by-side into the corner. I would definitely try to give up the corner to another class before trying to go too wide. This section is pretty sketchy power-wise for the BMW M2. I don't suspect they're going to have enough grip to try to get alongside. GT4s have a little bit more downforce. There'll be a bit better coming out of here, so they might try to overtake. Be aware that this line, our ideal line, is coming out wide and then cutting across the track. If a GT4 is lined up behind you that went in shallow or like tries the over under on you, they might come alongside your inside at this point, so you won't be able to come all the way back across the track. So you have two things to watch out for. Is either one, if they got a good run out of the corner, you're not going to be able to go all the way left. And if they didn't get that great of an exit, what there is a bit of a straightaway, they might, when you start turning left here to open up the corner, they might have an opportunity to come to your inside. So be aware of both things. Their break-in zone is kind of similar, just after the 300 zone. We're closer to the 200 with the GR86, but there is an opportunity for maybe a GT4 to come down your inside here. BMW, I don't think it's going to be all that possible because they're losing a lot of traction coming out of that corner. So yeah, those are things to keep in mind. I really do not want to be too wide in this corner. Same with turn one. There's not much room for error here. I would rather lose a second letting cars through than be side by side and potentially end up in the wall because one of the other cars made a mistake or you overcooked it or something. Especially there's a big long straightaway here now. So now is the perfect opportunity for all these cars to get by. So let all the cars by through here. Next break-in section, we're breaking near the 300. You can lift and coast, let some cars by. Pretty easy. As you can see, a lot of lift and coast. I only lost less than a second. So it's not too hurtful lap time. It's to lift and coast and let cars by. Yeah, you can definitely expect cars to try to overtake you on the inside here. So I would highly suspect you'll have GT4s and BMW M2s trying to overtake you in the braking zone. And there is a decent amount of room for this corner, but it's not, I mean, it's Long Beach. There's walls on each side, so you got to be careful. You're going to need to turn in a little bit later if you're side by side with the car, and be aware if they are on these bumps, especially the M2, they're going to lose traction and they're going to start sliding. So be aware that they might slide out and push you up against the wall. So if you can let them by before the braking zone, great. If not, just be very careful. There are going to be sketchy over those bumps. If nobody is side by side with you, you are pretty fast through this whole section. I don't think anybody stands a chance against the GR86. They're pretty quick. The hairpin, I really suspect the GR86 is fastest through this whole section, so I'm hoping, unless there was a car side by side with you, I don't suspect they're going to try anything through this corner. If you're side by side battling with another GR86, be aware that it's a tight corner, so you're going to have to go extra wide if you're on the inside, and if you're on the inside, you're going to have a hell of a hard time trying to turn around. You could end up in an Austin Powers moment. I really don't recommend any attempts at an overtake on this sector. It is way safer to just stay in behind a car and open up your exit, or like try to nail your exit of the corner instead. Because if you try to overtake down the inside here, you're just going to get completely screwed and you're not going to be able to make the whole corner. You're going to end up parked up against the wall and all the cars behind you parked behind them, and it's going to be chaos. So I highly suggest nobody makes an overtake in this zone. It would be bad for pretty much the entire field. So unless there's a massive mistake in the sector ahead of this, just tuck in behind and fight for a different corner, because this can make everybody look real stupid real fast. Yeah, like if you're too tight, you're not going to be able to make the corner. You'll end up in the Acura signs, and then there'll be a bunch of cars behind you, and it'll be a parking lot. So yeah, be very careful with this last corner here. So that's it for the track guide. Obviously, pit lane is here. When you're coming out, what I'm going to do for this race is I'm going to leave the comms open. I'm not going to close the comms for this race alone because pit lane is pretty sketchy. I think what you're going to do is you're going to call out before you come into this sector here, if you're pit in, you're going to call out your car number and saying pit in this time by, so that people won't try to get it on your inside right here. So if they try to get on your inside, you're not going to be able to pit. So I think if you call it out early, that way you can kind of stay to the inside, and then you can duck into the pits, because the pit entry is here. It is a sketchy one. If you're on the outside and there's a car on your inside, you're going to be forced to go one more lap because you won't be able to turn in. I've seen in MPRL there's been lots of crashes because cars just dove into the pits without realizing there was a car on their inside, and causing issues. So that's one more thing to note, is I will have the comms open, and so I do hope that people call out if there's cars around them close by. Call out that you're going to be pitting before the hairpin, so that way people are kind of aware of that situation.